When you talk about reflecting, yesterday I did an 8-hour class on attitudes in the workplace, and this is a part of that class. But this was a part that was specifically designed for a group that I'm involved with called the Generational Wealth Alliance. When we talk about where our attitudes come from, when I talk about the fact that my grandfather and my grandfather had 7 grandchildren or 7 children and close to 30 grandchildren, I was the lucky one. I was the one who inherited his hands. A lot of people look at my hands and think it's arthritis. No, it's a congenital birth defect that I inherited from my grandfather through my mother. If I have a daughter, and if she were to have a son, that son would have the possibility of having it. I was able to be in the Journal of Joint Services in 1955 when they were talking about my hands. Now, the interesting thing about my hands is that the only thing it really held me back from was a job at the stamping plant for Ford Motor Company, because when I did the initial interview, the guy said to me, "We have enough hand injuries without hiring you."
Hmm.
When I went home and told my dad that, it was second and only twice in my entire life have I ever heard my dad use a curse word, and that was his reaction to me telling him that. When we talk about or we explore where our attitudes come from, I'd always wonder because I had a very close friend, and when we first met, we realized that we had both gone to the same high school in Cleveland, which was East Technical High School. That was the school that Harrison Dillard and both Jesse Owens also graduated from. We went to the same high school, but we went to that high school 5 years apart. But in further conversation, I found out not only had we gone to the same high school, but we also had gone to the same preschool and attended the same neighborhood recreation center. Still, I'm wondering where her attitude came from. Later, she and I had a conversation, and I've known her over 40 years. So this conversation was about 10 years ago. And in that conversation, she helped me at that point to really understand where her attitude potentially came from when she made the following statement. She said, "You grew up in a house. You grew up in a house with a mom and a dad. You grew up in a house that had a yard where you could go out and play safely." Think about that. Whereas she grew up in the projects with a single mom in a neighborhood that she didn't feel safe going out into. Now, the plus side of that story is that her mom was the law clerk for Louis Stokes. Louis Stokes and his brother Carl Stokes. Carl Stokes was the first Black mayor of a major Black city or a major city. Because of her mom's job working in that law office, they were later able to move into one of the suburbs, if you will, into a much better neighborhood. But her early life was forged, if you will, by where she lived, the restrictions she had, and that was a part of her attitude.
Mhm.
When you look at people that you're around, and you can look at people and go, we have very similar situations. We started off in a lot of the same ways. We grew up in the same neighborhoods. But did you really grow up in the same neighborhood?
Mhm.
Just because you're in the same zip code, you could be in an entirely different neighborhood. When you look at the difference between the projects and a home,
Mhm.
those are the reflections, and my voice is going, those are the reflections that we look at when we start to try to determine what causes a person's attitude and what things they can reflect back on. With that said, before my voice goes completely, I'm going to end this, but think about that when you look at people and you try to figure out why
Mhm.
they respond to you the way they
Mhm.
respond to you. Madam Toastmaster.